This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We try to cut through all the noise and really find those fascinating insights that are kind of hiding beneath the surface.
Yeah, get past the headlines.
Exactly. And today, we're going somewhere maybe a little unexpected. When you think Nepal, what pops into your head?
Himalayas. Definitely Everest.
Temples?
Right, the majestic Himalayas, ancient temples, maybe Everest Base Camp. But there's a new generation there, and they're conquering a totally different kind of peak. Equally exciting, I'd say. The summit of tech entrepreneurship.
It's actually pretty remarkable when you look at the numbers. I mean, back in 2015, Nepal had, maybe 300 startups-ish?
Barely, yeah.
And by 2023, boom, over 1,500. That's a huge jump. StartupBlink ranks them 5th in South Asia now.
5th, wow.
Yeah, and Kathmandu, the capital, it's even listed in the top 1,000 cities globally to start a business.
That's incredible context. And IT, information technology, is really leading the charge in investment deals. It's attracting both local money and international interest. You can just feel this immense energy, this entrepreneurial spirit.
Okay, so that's an incredible boom, no doubt. But here's the twist, the paradox, and this is where we really start our deep dive today. Despite all that growth in numbers, more startups, more investment chatter, Nepal actually slipped last year in the global rankings, down to 107th.
Yeah, that caught my eye too.
So what does that tell us? Our sources are calling it a maturity gap. It feels like the enthusiasm, the sheer number of ideas is running way ahead of the crucial support systems.
The infrastructure, basically.
Exactly. Infrastructure, like accessible capital, laws that actually help innovation, enough skilled people. So for you, maybe you're an entrepreneur listening, this means it's still a real uphill battle to get funding, even with a great idea.
And for investors, it's a flag to look beyond just the raw startup count. You need to see if that foundation is solid.
Right. So with all this energy, why are so many projects apparently stalling out, just staying as ideas? And why does hitting that unicorn status, the billion-dollar valuation, why does that feel almost impossible right now in Nepal?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't
Yeah.
it? Or maybe the billion-dollar one.
Well, yeah, that's what we're unpacking today. We're going to look at where the innovation's actually happening, how people find funding, or more often, how they don't.
The funding labyrinth, as some call it.
Good name for it. And the role of incubators, are they helping or part of the problem? We'll look at the successes, definitely, but also the failures, because you learn a lot there, too.
Absolutely. Understanding the barriers is key.
Yep. And hopefully identify some concrete steps needed for this ecosystem to really make that quantum leap.
So where is this growth actually happening? It's not just random. It seems pretty concentrated in like 3 main areas.
Okay, what are they?
Financial technologies, fintech, Then educational technologies, edtech. And the third is software and data services.
Right.
And importantly, this isn't just Nepal copying global trends blindly. These sectors are booming because they're tackling really specific, pressing local problems. That makes the innovation feel very grounded, very relevant.
Okay, let's dig into that. Fintech first. You mentioned financial inclusion was low.
Historically, very low,
Yeah.
especially outside the main cities. Getting basic banking services was complex, sometimes just not possible for a lot of people.
So a clear gap in the market.
Exactly. And startups jumped in. You had eSewa. They were the real pioneers, started way back in 2009.
Wow, 2009, that's early for digital wallets anywhere, let alone Nepal.
It really was. And then you have Kulti, a major competitor, launched in 2017. They essentially had to create the digital payments market from basically nothing.
How'd they do that?
Well, things like digital wallets, enabling millions of people to use just their mobile phones for transactions, paying bills, sending money. It was, frankly, a massive societal shift driven by these tech companies.
Incredible. Okay, what about EdTech? What problems were they solving?
Similar story, really, driven by issues in the traditional education system. Often a lack of quality teaching materials, not enough qualified teachers, especially in certain subjects or areas.
So creating demand for alternatives.
Precisely. And you see examples like Programmers. It's this website for learning programming.
I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's become globally successful, which is amazing, right? It shows Nepalese developers aren't just solving local issues. They're creating content the whole world wants.
That's a great sign. And the third area, software and data.
Right. This sector is thriving mostly because there's huge global demand for IT services. And Nepal has this pool of talented specialists who are relatively speaking, cost-effective.
The outsourcing model, basically.
Pretty much, these companies bring in vital foreign currency, they create good jobs. It's building a really important technological base for the country.
So if you zoom out, what's the overall picture right now?
I'd say right now the ecosystem is still quite inward-looking, as our sources put it. The models that work best are ones that adapt things already proven elsewhere. Digital wallets, ride-sharing, food delivery, but tailor them very specifically to Nepal's conditions.
So success isn't about having some radically new technology.
Not usually, no. It's much more about execution. Can you actually solve a specific local problem effectively? That's the key. And honestly, that's a perfectly natural stage of development. Entrepreneurs learn by fixing things at home first. Global ambitions often come later.
Okay, so we've got the ideas bubbling up, the spirit is there. But you mentioned infrastructure gaps. What's the single biggest obstacle holding things back?
Oh, funding. Access to funding, without a doubt.
Still the main bottleneck.
Yeah. Nepal's investment culture, historically, has been super conservative. Local investors, even the banks, they tend to prefer things they can see and touch: real estate, tangible assets, low risk.
Right, predictable returns.
Exactly. Tech startups. They're seen as risky, uncertain, long payback times. So traditional capital sources have largely just steered clear. The banking system hasn't really stepped up for innovative ventures either.
That's tough. A real contrast to places where venture capital is more established. But you said things are shifting slowly.
Yeah, slowly, but it's definitely happening. You're seeing a new generation of investors emerge. People who maybe worked or studied abroad, saw how VC works elsewhere.
And the first PE VC funds are appearing.
Yes. We've got the Nepal Private Equity Association, NPEA. Their data shows between 2012 and 2022, 8 main funds invested over $66 million across 15 sectors.
Okay, that's not insignificant.
It's not. And guess which sector got the most deals?
Let me guess. IT.
Bingo. IT was the absolute leader. So while it's maybe not a floodgate opening, it's definitely what you'd call a tectonic shift. Things are moving.
That's encouraging. And the government's trying to nudge things along too, right? I saw something about a startup fund in the latest budget.
Yeah, the 2024-25 budget. They announced a 1 billion Nepali rupees fund. That's about $7.5 million. The stated goal is ambitious. Support 10,000 businesses, create 100,000 jobs.
Big goals. How effective will it be?
That's the big question, always with government funds. There are concerns about bureaucracy, allocation, effectiveness, but just announcing it sends a positive signal. It shows the government is at least acknowledging the sector's importance.
Okay, but despite this shift, there's still a challenge.
Oh yeah, the core problem persists. Most of that funding, private or public, tends to flow to companies that are already established, already showing some growth, some traction.
Less risky bets.
Exactly. The really early stage startups pre-seed, seed stage, where the most radical innovation might happen, they still face a serious capital crunch. It's really hard for them.
This sounds like where impact funds might be playing a really interesting role.
They absolutely are. They're a crucial bridge right now. You've got funds like Dolma Impact Fund and Business Oxygen, which is backed by the IFC, part of the World Bank.
And they have a dual goal, right? Financial returns and social impact.
Precisely. They invest in areas like clean energy, healthcare, education, sustainable agriculture, as well as tech. By doing this, they're kind of de-risking the whole venture capital idea in the eyes of the local market.
How so?
Well, they show that you can invest in these newer sectors, including tech, and achieve both positive social outcomes and make good financial returns. Dolma's investment in Kathmandu, the food delivery service, is a prime example. It was successful on both fronts.
So they're legitimizing the whole concept.
Exactly. Impact investing in Nepal isn't just some niche thing. It's acting as a major catalyst. It's paving the way for more purely commercial venture funds to come in later.
That makes sense. So for entrepreneurs listening, who are these key players they should know about?
Well, besides Dolma and Business Oxygen, there's Atyanta Fund Management, Team Ventures, True North Associates, Kriti Venture Fund, Global Equity Fund, a growing list. It's becoming a more professional landscape. Practical resources are emerging.
Okay, so funding is one piece. What about the other support structures? Incubators, accelerators, are they filling the gap?
Well, there are quite a few now. Names like Idea Studio Nepal, King's Incubator, Accelerator Nepal, Impact Hub Kathmandu. They offer mentorship, workspace, run programs like pitch competitions, accelerator cohorts.
Sounds good on paper, like a solid foundation.
It does. But when you dig deeper, you find some systemic issues. A big one is that these organizations often operate in isolation. especially from universities.
Isolation? How?
Reports suggest universities are pretty non-reactive. They talk about entrepreneurship, but they're not really deeply involved in the practical side of incubation.
So the incubators are left picking up the slack.
Pretty much. Instead of accelerating promising businesses, they often end up having to act like vocational schools, teaching the absolute basics, how to write a business plan, basic finance, things universities should ideally be covering.
So they're not really accelerating, they're just getting people to the starting line.
In many cases, yes. And another issue is a lack of synergy between the players themselves. They sometimes seem to be competing for the same small pool of startups, the same end pie, rather than collaborating to grow the whole ecosystem.
Which leads to wasted effort, duplicated resources.
Exactly. It's inefficient. But there's a promising development here.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Growing cooperation with India. Their startup ecosystem is much more mature, right?
Definitely. Decades ahead in some ways.
So Nepalese startups are now participating in big Indian events like Startup Mahakumbh. And Nepalese universities Tribhuvan, Kathmandu University are signing agreements, MOUs, with top Indian tech institutes like IIT Madras Pravartak.
What's the benefit there?
Huge benefits. Access to a massive market, obviously. Access to sophisticated Indian investor networks. And crucially, learning best practices for actually running effective incubation programs, linking research with business. India's figured out a lot of this already.
So it's not just about having more incubators.
No, it's about better incubators. Qualitative change is needed. We need to see incubation centers set up inside universities, like at IIT Madras.
Integrated, not separate.
Right. Make practical entrepreneurship courses mandatory, taught by people who've actually built businesses, not just academics. And foster real collaboration between universities, incubators, investors, government. Everyone needs to work together to turn these places into genuine growth engines.
Okay, we've talked a lot about challenges, funding gaps, incubator issues, but let's shift focus. Let's talk about the heroes, the success stories, because those living stories are what really inspire people, right? They prove breakthroughs are possible even when things are tough.
Absolutely. And there are some really compelling ones. Kathmandu is a classic.
The food delivery service we mentioned earlier.
That's the one. It literally started from the founder's personal problem back in 2010. Manohar Adhikari was just tired of the bad lunch options near his office.
Huh. The classic startup origin story. Solve your own problem.
Exactly. But back then, ordering food online in Kathmandu, people thought he was crazy. It sounded like science fiction. Restaurants were skeptical. Customers were skeptical.
So how did he even start?
It was tough. For the first few years, they were losing money, apparently getting only about 5 orders a day.
5 orders a day? Wow. That takes serious persistence. Did he ever think of giving up?
You have to assume so. That kind of grit is incredible. And then, remember, they got hit by the massive 2015 earthquake, then the economic blockade with India shortly after.
Yeah.
Huge disruptions.
Just obstacle after obstacle. So how did they pull through and actually become successful?
Well, our sources point to 3 main things. First, Manohar's sheer tenacity, just refusing to quit. Second, getting investment at crucial moments.
Right. The funding we talked about. True North, Team Ventures.
Exactly. And then that big $4 million round from Dolma Impact Fund in 2023 was huge. And third was technology evolving at the right time. They launched their mobile app in 2015.
Right when smartphones were really taking off in Nepal.
Perfect timing. Suddenly, ordering was much easier, much more accessible for people.
It feels like Kathmandu is more than just a company, though. You said earlier they sort of built the market.
They really did. It's systemically important. They didn't just fill a niche. They basically created the online food delivery industry in Nepal. They had to teach restaurants how to work digitally, how to manage online orders. They had to get hundreds of thousands of Nepalis comfortable with ordering online.
So they changed habits, changed the culture.
Absolutely. They boosted the whole digital economy, the gig economy for riders. It's a massive impact.
Okay, another big one is the digital payments market. Isawa and Kulti.
Yeah, fascinating duel there. The Sewa, the pioneer from 2009, they spent like a decade basically building the market single-handedly.
What were their main challenges?
Huge challenges. Low digital literacy back then, a deep lack of trust in anything online, especially involving money. They had to build this massive agent network across the country just to let people deposit cash into their wallets. They had to convince banks to connect. It was foundational work.
Laying the groundwork for everyone else.
Pretty much. And then, in 2017, Kulti arrives, founded by a team with a really strong IT background.
The challenger. How are they different?
Much more aggressive, modern tactics. They had this viral teaser campaign before launch, came up with a catchy name, Kulti means pocket in Nepali. Very clever.
Yes.
Aggressive marketing, lots of social initiatives, like their Smart Chori program teaching digital literacy to girls and women. It helped them gain traction really fast.
And they just merged with another player, right? IME Pay.
That's the latest big news. A landmark merger. Now they're an even stronger challenger to ECO's dominance. It's really heating up that market.
Any other quick examples worth mentioning?
Sure. Toodle was the first local ride-sharing app. Kind of proved the model worked before bigger international players came in. Sastadil is a major e-commerce platform, also got investment from Dolma. And Program is that educational site we mentioned, a global hit from Nepal.
So, looking at all these successes, Foodmandu, Isua, Kulti, Programmelas, what's the common thread? What makes them work in that specific environment?
I think the key takeaway is that in an underdeveloped market like Nepal's, the most successful startups often function like infrastructure projects.
Infrastructure projects. How so?
They're not just launching a product into an existing market, they're often creating the market itself. They have to build demand, build trust, sometimes build the entire supporting ecosystem around them.
Ah, okay. Like Isua building the agent network or Foodmandu teaching restaurants digital skills.
Exactly. That's why it often takes them years, sometimes a decade or more, to really succeed. Their contribution goes way beyond just business. They're fundamentally changing how things work in the country.
Okay, that's inspiring. But now we have to look at the other side of the coin, the sobering reality.
Yeah, the failure rate.
Up to 90% of Nepalese startups fail. That's a really high number. Why? What's going wrong? Is it internal issues or those external barriers we talked about?
It's both, really. Internally, you definitely see the usual suspects. Weak business models sometimes, founders lacking management experience, poor financial planning, running out of cash. Standard startup problems anywhere.
Sure.
But in Nepal, the structural barriers seem to weigh much more heavily. They're harder for an individual startup to overcome.
And what's the biggest external barrier, according to the sources?
The personnel shortage. The talent issue. It's described as the most pressing and fundamental problem.
How does that play out?
Well, thanks to globalization, platforms like Upwork, Fiverr, TopTal, Nepalese IT specialists can work directly for clients anywhere in the world, often from home. And the growing local business process outsourcing, BPO industry, also hires them to serve international clients.
And they pay better.
Way better. Often 2 to 3 times what a local startup serving the domestic market can possibly afford to pay.
Ouch. So the best talent gets poached.
Essentially, yes. Or they choose the higher, more stable BPO salaries. This creates a really vicious cycle. The top talent goes to outsourcing or works remotely for foreign firms. What's left of local startups is often, frankly, the least capable talent.
Which impacts everything.
Everything. Product quality suffers. It makes it harder to attract investment because investors see the weak team. And ultimately, it leads to failure. So a local startup's main competitor isn't necessarily another local startup.
It's the global outsourcing firm.
Exactly. The battle is fundamentally for people, for talent.
Okay, talent drain is huge.
Yeah.
What else? Regulatory problems.
Oh, yeah. Big time. The laws are just way behind the tech curve. There's still no clear legal definition of a startup in Nepal.
Seriously. That creates uncertainty, right?
Massive uncertainty. Are you a regular company? Something else. What rules apply? And then you have outdated laws actively hindering new models. Like transport laws written decades ago make ride-sharing technically illegal if using private cars. It's a constant headache for services like Toodle or Patho.
Wow. And bureaucracy.
Yep. Complex registration, lots of paperwork, unclear government policies on emerging tech like AI, Internet of Things. It all creates friction, slows things down, makes it harder, more expensive to innovate. It can feel like the environment is actively hostile sometimes.
So talent, regulation, anything else major?
There's one more thing, maybe more subtle. Some sources call it the culture of celebrity entrepreneurship.
Celebrity entrepreneurship, what's that?
It's more of a mindset issue. Some founders get caught up in the hype, the social media buzz, building their personal brand.
Focusing on looking successful rather than being successful.
Exactly. They focus on appearing innovative, getting interviewed, going to conferences, rather than the hard, unglamorous work of actually building a sustainable business, finding product market fit, managing cash flow.
Creating an alternate reality, as one source put it.
Yeah. And inevitably, that reality crumbles when faced with real market pressures or competition. And, when experienced employees see these kinds of zombie startups, all hype, no substance collapse.
It makes stable outsourcing jobs look even more attractive.
Precisely. It further fuels the talent drain.
And we've seen examples of promising ideas that just didn't make it right. Ends, Fresh Snack, Cool Cat, 11 beep.
Yeah, names that had some buzz but ultimately couldn't find a sustainable path. It's a stark reminder. A good idea is absolutely not enough. You need the talent, you need the capital, and you need a supportive or at least not obstructive legal environment.
Okay, so we've painted a picture of huge potential, but also significant hurdles. Where do we go from here? How does Nepal move from just having lots of startups to having a truly mature, thriving ecosystem?
It's going to take a really coordinated effort. Government, investors, universities, entrepreneurs, everyone needs to pull in the same direction.
Mm.
Our sources suggest focusing on 4 key areas for that qualitative leap.
All right, let's break them down. What's first?
Regulatory reform. Got to create a clearer, friendlier environment for innovation. A green corridor, if you will.
How? What would that look like?
Ideally, a comprehensive startup act. Something that finally gives clear legal definitions for startup, venture fund, takes them out of that gray area.
Okay, clarity is good.
And it should simplify things. Cut the red tape and costs for registration reporting, maybe offer special tax breaks or holidays for the first few years when cash is tightest.
Makes sense. What about those outdated laws hindering new tech?
That's crucial. The Act needs to enable regulatory sandboxes. These are controlled environments where startups in new fields, fintech, AI, IoT, can test their products with real users for a limited time, without falling foul of old laws that just weren't designed for them.
Okay, so update the rules and create safe spaces to test new ideas. That's step one. What's next?
Second is building a much stronger bridge between education and business, turning universities from places that just talk about ideas into places that actually launch businesses.
And how do we do that? We mentioned the isolation earlier.
Scale up what seems to be working, especially learning from India. Create joint business incubators physically located at the main universities, but managed collaboratively. Academics, VCs, successful entrepreneurs all involved.
Bring the real world onto campus.
Exactly. And change the curriculum. Introduce mandatory practical courses on tech entrepreneurship, financial modeling for startups, market validation taught by people who've actually done it, not just theorists.
Get students building things, testing ideas, maybe even launching ventures before they graduate?
That's the goal. Encourage applied research that leads to commercialization through startups.
Right. So reform regulations, fix the education business link. What's third?
Third, tackling that huge talent retention problem. This one's maybe the trickiest, but vital.
How do you stop the brain drain when global markets pay so much more?
You probably can't stop it completely. So the sources suggest a pragmatic approach. Use outsourcing as a springboard, not just a threat.
Oh, how does that work?
Actively support the growth of large, high-quality IT service companies within Nepal. Companies that can compete globally, win complex projects, and therefore afford to pay competitive salaries closer to international levels.
So keep the top talent in Nepal, even if they're serving foreign clients initially.
Yes. Let Nepalese specialists build world-class skills on challenging projects. Let these service companies accumulate capital and, crucially, sophisticated management experience.
And the long-term payoff.
The theory, seen elsewhere like India or Eastern Europe, is that eventually you get exiters. People who've worked in these successful service firms, gained skills, networks, maybe some capital, then leave to start their own product companies, often targeting global markets from day one.
Ah, so outsourcing becomes a training ground for future product entrepreneurs.
Potentially, yes. It's a long game, but maybe more realistic than trying to match Silicon Valley salaries tomorrow.
Okay, pragmatic approach to talent. What's the fourth pillar?
Fourth is consciously developing an investment culture, changing the perception of venture capital among domestic investors.
Getting that conservative local money to see tech startups not just as risky bets, but as a potential high-growth asset class.
Exactly. How do you do that? One way is to really publicize the successes, especially the exits, when a startup gets acquired or goes public, IPO. Show tangible proof that investors can make significant returns. Industry groups like NPEA and business media have a big role here.
Showcase the wins.
Yep. And also conduct more education, workshops, seminars for potential angel investors, family offices, even banks, explaining how venture investing actually works, valuation methods, risk management, deal structures. Demystify it.
Make it feel less like gambling and more like informed risk-taking.
Right. And finally, the government could help here too, perhaps by creating state-backed funds that co-invest alongside private VC funds, a fund-to-funds model.
How does that help?
It reduces the risk for private investors. If the government is putting skin in the game too, it makes private VCs more comfortable, encourages them to be more active, especially at the earlier stages.
Okay, four big areas: regulation, education, talent, investment culture. None of them are easy fixes.
No, definitely not. These things take time, consistent effort, and real political will. But taking these steps, really focusing on them, would lay a much stronger foundation for Nepal to become a genuine tech player in the region.
So let's circle all the way back to our big question at the start. Can Nepal, this country famous for mountains, actually grow its first tech unicorn?
I think the answer is yes, but with some important qualifiers.
Okay.
It's not going to happen tomorrow. And it almost certainly won't happen by just trying to carbon copy Silicon Valley or Bangalore or anywhere else. Nepal's path is going to be its own. It has to be.
Because our deep dive showed this real contrast, didn't it? On one hand, you've got this incredible energy, the entrepreneurial buzz, lots of young, eager talent.
Huge potential, yeah.
But on the other hand, these really fundamental constraints are still holding it back. That lack of easily accessible capital, the outdated regulations, the gap between education and the real needs of business.
And maybe biggest of all, that constant drain of top talent because of the competition from global outsourcing.
Exactly. So given those constraints, what's the realistic, pragmatic strategy for the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
It seems to be less about trying to suddenly leapfrog those problems and more about systematically addressing them while playing to Nepal's strengths. So first, focus on solving big domestic infrastructure problems.
Like what?
Things like logistics, maybe clean energy solutions, modernizing agriculture, agri-tech, continuing to improve financial inclusion, areas where local startups have a home field advantage. They understand the specific problems deeply.
Okay, solve big local needs first. What else?
Second, strategically embrace the global IT services market. Don't just see it as a competitor for talent. See it as that opportunity we discussed to build skills, accumulate capital, gain management experience. Use it as that springboard.
Right. And third,
Third, maximize the benefits from partnerships with more mature regional players, especially India. Learn from their successes and their mistakes in building ecosystems. Tap into their markets and investor networks. Don't reinvent the wheel.
so solve local problems, leverage global services, learn from neighbors,
That seems to be the most viable path forward right now.
which leads to a final thought. Maybe the first Nepalese unicorn, when it does emerge perhaps in the next decade or so,
Mhm.
maybe it won't be some flashy, hyped-up consumer app based on a fleeting trend.
Probably not.
Maybe it will be the result of years, maybe decades of hard work building one of those complex, less glamorous infrastructure businesses we talked about, something that solves a really fundamental problem for the country.
Yeah, I think that's much more likely. Its appearance won't be the cause of a mature ecosystem. It'll be the consequence of having finally built one. Sustainable, resilient, and uniquely Nepali.
The assault on that new tech peak has definitely begun. The path is steep, it's difficult, but it feels like Nepalese entrepreneurs have a real shot at reaching the summit.
They certainly have the determination.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other unexpected places around the globe might be quietly building their own tech revolutions right now? Something to think about. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.